The story and characters in this series are inspired from our history. This is the opening card to every episode of Kurulus Osman and Dirilis Ertugrul. I want you to note the keyword inspired. This denotes that this is not a one-to-one historical documentary about these legends, but rather a creative and entertaining depiction about the history, the myths of these heroes. Kurulus Osman as a show is more highly criticized than Dirilis Ertugrul, and the basis for a lot of these arguments is historical accuracy, which I believe is actually being conflated with good storytelling, good writing. Historical dramas walk a fine line between fact and fiction, documentation and dramatization. And nowhere is this more evident than the Turkish epics Dirilis Ertugrul and Kurulus Osman. But while both portray the rise of the Ottoman Empire, only one is universally praised. Why is that? Let's start with Dirilis Ertugrul, the show that turned a relatively unknown tribal leader into a cultural icon. Here's the twist: we know almost nothing concrete about Ertugrul historically. Most of what we do know comes from sources written over 100 years after his death. There is debate over the year of his birth, where he died, or even some of the events that happened in the show, if they even happened at all. And yet, audiences were captivated. Why? Because it wasn't really about history. It was about heroism. It was about values. It was about faith, loyalty, and honor. Spreading the truth. And actually, the lack of detailed records gave writers room to build a legend. They created layered characters, emotional arcs, and a world that felt epic, regardless of historical accuracy. And to supplement that writing, they took actual real historical records of events that did occur during the timeline that Ertugrul presumably lived in, and supplemented the writing by making sure the timeline of events were accurate. In contrast, Kurulus Osman starts at a moment of time that is far more documented. We know more about Osman's reign, his battles, and the foundation of the Ottoman Empire. And that, ironically, might be part of the problem. With more history to honor, there is less room to breathe, less room to imagine. Still, many of the show's issues aren't about historical constraints, they're about storytelling choices. Even with the actual valid historical records that exist, they deviated from history far more than they did with Ertugrul. Not just in a evidential way, but in a logical sense. Just a few nitpicks here, but they totally missed the opportunity to build proper and well-developed characters that did exist during Osman's rise, such as Akçakoca, Konur Alp, and they wasted opportunities with Mikhail Koses. One of the biggest issues with the show is storytelling and villains, right? But they totally gloss over Roger de Flores, a huge Catalan commander that had a big battle that was well documented, where I think Osman's Alps were the underdogs. I think it was 3,000 versus 5,000, and they won. I mean, imagine if they translated that into a whole season. That could have been a whole season of proper storytelling, a strong villain. Not to mention totally taking over some Greek island that Dündar Bey took refuge in. And to further highlight the fact that it's the actual writing that's been poor rather than the historical accuracy, is the whole idea of Mongols constantly being a threat. It's their favorite backup plan, their resort. They fail to write interesting Byzantine characters and instead rely on the easy way out with the Mongols. They obviously have a very distinctive villainous look, demeanor, and style. But for 90% of Osman's rise, his main enemies were the Byzantine and then some of the Beyliks. The actual problem that we see in Kurulus Osman is reliance on formula. Villains plotting in the shadows, Osman delivering long speeches about destiny, the same betrayals, the same battles, the same three-pronged villain enemy arc. You'll have the Beylik, you have the Mongols on one side, you have the Byzantines on the other side, and eventually they'll all team up and somehow lose. There's no nuance. And on top of that, characters are just mindless and useless drones in the background. It starts to feel predictable, hollow, as if the show is trying to feel grounded without building the emotional weight that makes it better. And once again, historical accuracy does not matter. If the show was completely historically accurate, it would be pretty boring. It wouldn't be boring, that might not be the right thing to say. But it wouldn't be a show, a series. It would be more of a documentary. So historical accuracy, I would say, provides a resource, acts as a source of guidance, reference that the writers can use in order to develop stories, interesting and better stories, story arcs. Obviously, because this is a show about a real historical figure, we have to at least respect and follow the events as much as possible, realistically portray the characters as much as possible. But again, this isn't a thing about historical accuracy as much as it is about logic. When you have Osman conquering an entire castle with 5 Alps, that's not historically accurate. But the historical accuracy isn't really where the problem isn't really where the criticism is developed from. It's that you're trying to insult the fans' intelligence, the viewers' intelligence. Plenty of historically acclaimed TV shows play fast and loose with the facts. The Crown fabricates private conversations. Vikings compresses timelines and alters relationships. Rome turns decades of political conflict into a 2-season arc. But what they all have in common is this: a strong narrative core. The best historical fiction isn't a lecture. It's a lens through which we understand the spirit of an era. So when fans criticize Kurulus Osman, are they really mad about historical mistakes, or is it something deeper? Fans want momentum, they want development, they want characters who grow, struggle, change. And that's what Ertugrul gave us: the internal conflict between faith and duty, a man torn between tribal loyalty and empire building, personal growth that mirrors the empire's rise, not just within the main character, but within multiple characters around him. And it's not just the characters that are built and developed, it's the story. There's clear progress. We see Ertugrul start from being the son of a tribal leader to becoming the leader of that tribe, to growing that tribe into a sort of semi-small beylik that conquers cities and bazaars and so on and so forth, and then builds up a nice community around it, right? And then he basically sets the foundation for Osman to become a proper beylik. And in parallel, you see Turgut grow from being just this warrior to being a strong commander. You see Bamsi from being the strong, more bronze than brains, to becoming a leader of like the Alps in his own right. We see the world expand, the world build, the stakes are higher. Every season provides a harder and stronger challenge for the main characters to live up to stand up for. And on top of that, we constantly had strong villains. I mean, one of the core elements of a good story is a strong villain that the character can mirror, that the character can have as a foil. And in Ertugrul, obviously, we had Saadettin Köpek, right? Each season he grew stronger, and each season we saw how Ertugrul's growth, conflicted against that. There was this dynamic between hero and villain. In Kurulus Osman often feels fully formed from the start. Righteous, powerful, visionary. He was always leading and bossing people around, always winning everything with not so much effort. And the evolution and devolution, like we start from becoming a tribe to you have like a palace, and then they lost the palace, and there's a lot of like production issues in the back, like losing characters and so on and so forth, that are to the detriment of the show itself. But now I have hope. I feel like season 6, like not the entire season 6, the moment Turgut came back, I think they changed the writer, I think they've changed direction, and I have hope that they're going to at least finish off with a bang. Turgut, there was the myth that he lived up to 125. I think there was even a myth that he outlived Osman. And okay, cool, those are cool historical myths, not completely facts, but there's some real historical lore that surrounds him, and so because of that, we can believe that he comes back this late into the show, and he's still a strong warrior, he still has his skills, and historically, logically, we might not know how valid that is, but it doesn't matter. So long as they treat his character correctly, give him proper development, and give him proper closure, we will be happy. In the end, what made Dirilis Ertugrul great wasn't that it got every historical detail right. It was that it made us care about people, ideals, sacrifice, and the story. History provided the bones, but it was the storytelling that gave it its soul. If Kurulus Osman wants to reach those heights, it doesn't need more history books. It needs stronger writing, deeper characters, and a story that earns its epic scale, not just assumes it. Historical dramas should illuminate the past, not be imprisoned by it. Thank you all very much for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe down below, and let me know what you guys think. Have a great rest of your days.